On March 19, 2008, police in the quiet Austrian town of Amstetten descended into a dark, damp cellar and emerged with a horror that would shatter the calm of a community and reverberate around the globe. A woman, 49-year-old Elizabeth Fritz, and her 7 children, all born of a father's unspeakable abuse, had been hidden there for nearly a quarter of a century. The story of the Fritzl case begins long before that fateful day, with a man whose name would become synonymous with depravity. Joseph Fritzl, born in 1935 in the small village of Amstetten, married his first wife, Rosemary, in 1956, and together they raised 4 children in a modest 2-story home that they built themselves. By the early 1980s, the family was outwardly typical. Neighbors saw a respectable, hard-working father, a devoted husband, and a quiet household. Yet behind the facade, Fritzl harbored a darkness that would soon erupt into a monstrous crime. In 1984, Joseph's teenage daughter, Elizabeth, returned home from a summer camp, only to find her father waiting for her in the basement. He claimed a plumbing issue needed her help, and she was led down a narrow stairwell to a concrete room that would become her prison for the next 24 years. The cellar was a self-constructed bunker, sealed with a heavy steel door, a ventilation system, a toilet, and a small window too high to reach. Joseph told his daughter he was constructing a playroom for a future son, a lie that would bind her to a life of isolation, fear, and forced servitude. For the next 2 decades, Elizabeth endured unimaginable torment. She was subjected to regular sexual assault, forced to bear 7 children, and denied any contact with the outside world. The first child, a son named Michael, was taken away shortly after birth, placed with a foster family under a false name, and raised without ever knowing his true lineage. The subsequent children, Anna, Kirsten, Stefan, Felix, and Katharina, were raised in the cellar, their world limited to the flickering light of a single bulb and the sound of their father's distant footsteps above. Joseph maintained tight control. He would occasionally bring food through a small hatch, speak through a speaker, and punish any attempts at rebellion with threats, physical violence, and the ever-present terror of the locked door. Outside the cellar, Joseph crafted a double life. He was elected to the local council, participated in community events, and even took on a role as a volunteer for the Red Cross. His charming demeanor and civic involvement shielded him from suspicion, allowing the horror beneath his home to persist unchecked for so long. It was only in 2008, when a teenage daughter of the family, Kirsty, suffered a severe concussion after a fall, that the facade began to crumble. Joseph, fearing that an emergency would expose his secret, called an ambulance and requested a doctor be sent to the cellar. The attending physician, alarmed by the squalid conditions and the presence of a frightened, half-grown child, alerted the authorities. When the police arrived, they found Elizabeth and her children alive but emaciated, living in a space no larger than a small bedroom. The revelation sent shockwaves through Austria and beyond. The case quickly became a global media sensation, prompting an outpouring of sympathy for the victims and revulsion toward their captor. Interviews with Elizabeth revealed the depths of her resilience. "I never lost hope," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Even in the darkest moments, I thought of my children and knew I had to survive for them." The legal proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. Joseph Fritzl was arrested on the very night of the discovery and placed under investigation for a litany of charges, including false imprisonment, rape, sexual assault of a minor, and the murder of Michael, whose body was later found buried in the garden. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence: the concrete bunker, forensic analysis of DNA linking Joseph to each child, photographs of the cellar, and the testimony of the surviving victims. The defense argued that Joseph suffered from a degenerative mental illness, a claim that was dismissed by both the judge and the public. On March 19, 2009, exactly 1 year after the shocking discovery, Joseph Fritzl stood before a Vienna court. The courtroom was filled with journalists, activists, and a grieving community demanding justice. After a brief trial lasting just over a week, the jury returned a verdict that resonated with the collective outrage: guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Joseph to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a sentence that underscored the gravity of his crimes. The court also ordered the confiscation of his property, ensuring that the house that had housed the horror would never again be used as a sanctuary for abuse. In the years that followed, the aftermath of the Fritzl case rippled through legal, social, and psychological spheres. Austria enacted stricter regulations for welfare checks on vulnerable populations, and the case spurred a worldwide reassessment of how societies monitor and protect at-risk individuals. Victim support groups formed, providing counseling and resources for Elizabeth and her children as they navigated the arduous path toward healing. The children, now young adults, have each chosen different routes to reclaim their identities, some pursuing education, others engaging in advocacy to raise awareness about hidden abuse. Subscribe to The Verdict for more stories like this.